Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Ready to get a little uncomfortable.
Always.
Today we're tackling excerpts from Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works.
Yeah.
Exploring this really complex ideology and how it works. And I've got an expert here to help break it all down.
Happy to be here.
So, fascism. It's not just a history lesson here.
Right. No, definitely not.
This is about how this stuff can pop up anywhere.
And it does.
Yeah. So Stanley kind of lays out, I guess you could say, like a blueprint of how these fascist movements, do their thing, how they get power.
Right.
Control. And he's got these mechanisms, ways they operate. And the first one, and this is like the foundation, is what he calls the mythic past.
Yeah, the mythic past. It's not just about we love the good old days.
Right.
It's about actually rewriting history to make it fit their agenda.
Oh, yeah. They pick and choose the parts they like, right?
Exactly. They distort stuff, even completely erase things to make this perfect story, this perfect past that never even existed.
It's kind of like, everybody loves a good origin story, right?
Sure.
But the danger is when that story is used to justify, power structures.
Absolutely.
And to, be prejudiced against minorities.
It's like, building a house on sand. If the foundation's messed up, the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Right. So they make this messed up foundation based on, half-truths and lies.
Exactly. And that's what these fascist movements do with history.
Okay, so what's an example of this mythic past happening?
Okay, well, think about Charles Lindbergh. Remember him?
Oh, yeah. American hero.
Famous aviator, yeah.
Solo transatlantic flight, the Spirit of St. Louis.
Exactly. But later, he got involved with the America First movement.
Which was...
opposed to America getting into World War II.
Okay.
And get this, in 1939, he writes this essay for Reader's Digest where he embraces white supremacy.
Whoa, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a big example of how even heroes can get sucked into this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In his essay, he talks about, building white ramparts and guarding against, quote, foreign races, unquote. It's really scary how this rewriting of history goes hand in hand with, making minority groups look like the enemy.
So it's like they create this ideal past where everybody looked and thought the same, and then they say anyone who doesn't fit that, should be kicked out or worse.
Exactly. And what's really crazy is this manipulation of history. It's not just one time or place. It's over and over again.
Like with the Lost Cause myth, right?
Yes.
About the Confederacy.
Romanticizing the South.
Making slavery no big deal.
Exactly. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that today.
Totally.
Still racial tension.
Yeah.
Still blocking real reconciliation.
And this isn't just in the West either, right? Stanley uses the example of the Rohingya people in Myanmar.
Oh, yeah. Horrible situation.
Officials have denied they even exist. They call it fake news.
It's a terrifying example of how erasing history can lead to really awful things.
Yeah.
By denying their history, they're dehumanizing them. Makes it easier to justify persecuting them.
It's so messed up how easily history can be twisted and used like that.
Yeah.
But it gets worse because this mythic past, it's just the first step.
It is. It's like the foundation for all these other fascist tactics.
So what comes next?
Well, once they've got this fake view of the past, they got to spread their message.
Right. Got to control what people hear.
That's where propaganda comes in.
Propaganda.
And Stanley shows us it's not just lies.
Oh, okay.
It's about twisting language and ideals that, we all believe in.
So they take these things we think are good, freedom, democracy, and they twist them.
Exactly, for their own agenda.
Wow.
A good example that Stanley gives is how the Confederacy used the idea of states' rights to defend slavery.
Oh, wow. Taking something legit, states having some power, and twisting it to justify something truly awful.
Exactly. And it's not just about co-opting language. It's also about messing with democratic values themselves. Stanley talks about how Hitler, he actually framed his dictatorship as, get this, true Germanic democracy.
What?
Yeah, messed up right.
It's scary how easily they can twist words to mean the opposite of what they should.
And this isn't just ancient history either. These manipulative tactics are all around us today. Look at how some groups try to twist the idea of freedom of speech.
Oh, yeah. That's in the news all the time.
All the time. And Stanley gives some really, really disturbing examples.
Like what?
Like Desiree Feruz.
Who's...
She got arrested for, get this, chuckling at Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearing.
Chuckling?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Wow. And then you have Jeremy Joseph Christian,
Okay.
the white nationalist who used free speech as a defense after a violent attack.
Wow.
Both cases show how this idea of free speech, which is so important for democracy, can be twisted and used to silence people and even excuse violence.
So it's not just like blatant lies. It's about taking these values, twisting them, and using them to like destroy the very things they're supposed to stand for.
Exactly. It's about making it so truth and reason don't matter. It's all about power.
Okay, so we've got this manipulation of history, this weaponizing of words. What else? What else do these movements go after?
Well, once they've created a fake reality and a way to spread their message, they target the institutions that help us make sense of the world and hold those in power accountable.
You mean like universities, the media, experts?
Exactly. Anything that it challenges them or offers a different perspective is seen as a threat.
Okay.
And they start attacking education, expertise. Stanley calls it anti-intellectualism.
Anti-intellectualism, okay. We see that in different ways, right? Sometimes they try to take over education, control what's being taught.
Control the curriculum.
Other times they just, attack these institutions directly.
Oh, yeah.
Call them elitist or out of touch.
It's all about undermining trust. For example, Stanley talks about how student protests, especially those about racial injustice, they're twisted by the media.
Oh, yeah. Instead of focusing on the issues, the students are shown as like out-of-control mobs.
Yeah, disrupting everything.
Yeah, like the university is this sacred place they're ruining.
It's classic, Turn the public against the people who are challenging the way things are.
And then there are guys like David Horowitz.
Oh, yeah.
Going after dangerous professors and dangerous courses.
It's about controlling what's acceptable to think.
It's about shutting down different ideas.
Exactly. And the crazy part is we hear the same kind of talk in politics today, even when it's not full-blown fascist movements. Like, think about all these attacks on political correctness and cancel culture.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It's all about, we're being censored. But it's often just a way to silence people who disagree with them.
Right. And Stanley connects this straight to, Trump and his attacks on academic freedom. It's a reminder that these tactics, they're not just in the past. They're here. They're now.
So they're making this mythic past, right? They're twisting language. They're attacking the places that, make knowledge, that challenge their ideas. So what's the point? What's the goal of all this?
Well, it leads to a very dangerous place, what Stanley calls a state of unreality.
Unreality.
And this isn't just about people having different opinions. It's about messing up the very idea of truth.
Truth.
Making it so you can't have a reasonable debate.
Because if you can make people not trust reliable sources, then they'll believe anything, right?
Yeah.
No matter how crazy it is.
Exactly. So that's state of unreality, right? It kind of creates the perfect environment for, conspiracy theories.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. If you don't trust the usual sources of info, you're more likely to believe anything you hear, right?
Huh. Exactly. It's like, you've made this vacuum, and it gets filled with misinformation, fear. And there are some really crazy examples of this, one that's been around for over 100 years, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
I've heard of that. It's been debunked, right? like a million times. Mm-hmm. But people still believe it.
It's a fake document. Supposedly reveals this Jewish plot to take over the world. It's a hoax, but it's still out there causing damage.
It shows that these theories, they're not just harmless,
No.
They can lead to real hatred.
Yeah.
Discrimination, even violence.
Exactly. And Stanley talks about other examples, too, like how the PS party in Poland, they rose to power using conspiracy theories.
Reminds me of the whole birtherism thing with Obama.
Yeah.
Totally baseless claims, but they caught on, and they were used to, undermine his whole presidency.
Exactly. It shows how made-up outrage, fake accusations, they can really work. They get people riled up.
And then there's Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Ah, yes. His Soros plan conspiracy. Classic.
That George Soros is, bringing in all these migrants?
That's the one. Totally made up, of course.
No evidence at all.
And Orban, he actually uses the fact that there's no evidence as proof that, Soros is controlling the media.
Oh, wow.
That they're hiding the truth. Pure propaganda. Just to make people afraid.
It's like they just throw out so much misinformation, so many crazy claims that you can't tell what's real anymore.
That's exactly it. They create this environment of confusion, fear, makes it impossible to have like a real conversation.
It's not like that marketplace of ideas thing where truth is supposed to, win out in the end.
Stanley talks about John Stuart Mill, the guy who championed that idea. Mill thought truth would emerge from, debate.
Right.
But in fascist politics, truth doesn't matter. It's all about controlling the story.
So it's not a marketplace of ideas. It's more like, I don't know, a war zone of narratives.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Facts get twisted. Evidence doesn't matter. Feelings are more important than logic.
And that brings us to another one of Stanley's mechanisms, law and order.
Yeah, this one feels really relevant now with all these strongman leaders around.
It's a tactic, used forever to target certain groups.
Okay.
To justify oppression.
So it's about, playing on people's fear.
Fear, exactly.
Making them think everything's out of control.
Chaos.
And then you're the only one who can fix it.
The savior.
You're the one who can bring back order.
They make these groups, these minorities, look like threats to safety, purity. They use fear.
Okay.
Especially, sexual anxiety.
Right.
To create like a moral panic.
Stanley talks about some really disturbing historical examples of this.
Oh, yeah, like the myth of black men as rapists of white women.
That was used to justify lynchings. Horrible.
For decades.
And Ida B. Wells, that amazing journalist, she fought against that.
She did.
She risked her life to show the truth.
Her research showed that these accusations, they were often completely made up, driven by racism and power.
But it shows how powerful these fear-based stories can be. Even when they're false, they can tap into these deep prejudices, and that can lead to violence, to oppression.
And sadly, these tactics are still used today. Stanley draws a parallel to the Rohingya crisis.
In Myanmar.
Same narrative of sexual threat. Used to justify violence against this minority group.
It's awful to think that these tactics, they're still effective.
They tap into our deepest fears, and they use those fears for their own gain.
And it's not just racial anxieties they use.
No.
It's also about anxieties around, masculinity, traditional families.
It's actually, think about the bathroom bills. Targeting trans people.
Yeah.
They use this fear of sexual predation to justify discrimination.
It's like they're saying trans people are inherently dangerous, which isn't true at all.
But by creating that fear, they can position themselves as the protectors of women, of children, and they get support for policies that are, really harmful.
Classic tactic. Create the problem, then swoop in and solve it. Wow. And this law and order focus, it often leads to more surveillance, harsher policing.
Or violence.
Against anyone they see as a threat.
Exactly.
It's dangerous.
It is. It erodes freedom, justice.
Makes people scared to speak out.
Yeah. They give up their freedoms for this fake sense of security.
Okay, so we've got the mythic past, twisting language, undermining institutions, spreading conspiracy theories, and weaponizing law and order. What else does Stanley talk about?
Well, there's this idea of victimhood, how it's used to get people on their side, especially people who feel like they're losing power.
So it's not about actual victims.
No.
It's about using people's resentment, their grievances.
Exactly. Manipulating those feelings, especially among, groups that used to be dominant.
Okay.
They might feel threatened by change, by social or economic changes.
Right.
And they twist that anxiety into oppression.
Okay. Which fuels resentment, anger.
And then they direct that anger at minorities, right?
Yeah, they become the scapegoats.
They get blamed for everything.
Exactly. Classic tactic. Shift the blame, find someone to blame, and then you can justify discriminating against them, even hurting them.
Stanley uses the men's rights activist movement as an example of this.
The MRA.
Yeah.
They often talk about men being victimized by feminism.
Okay.
They say men are the real victims in the fight for equality.
So they're saying, we're losing power and it's your fault.
Exactly. And they use this feeling of being a victim to justify attacking women's rights, rolling back progress.
It shows how these tactics can be really subtle, right? They appeal to people's emotions, their insecurities.
It's important to remember that these claims of victimhood, they're often based on a messed up view of reality.
Right.
A fear of losing power, not real oppression.
Okay, so we've talked about the mythic past, language, institutions, victimhood. What's the last mechanism Stanley covers? He looks at this concept summed up in a phrase that's, well, it's pretty disturbing given its connection to the Nazis.
Okay.
Arbeit macht frei.
Which means
work sets you free.
Ugh, that phrase is just, it's chilling.
It is.
But Stanley says it's more than just a slogan.
Right.
it represents something deeper about fascist ideology.
He says it shows their twisted logic about work,
Okay.
self-sufficiency, and social welfare.
So it's not just about, encouraging hard work.
No, it's much darker than that.
Okay.
Fascist movements, they often create this divide
Okay.
between the hardworking and the lazy, the undeserving.
They pit them against each other.
Exactly. They create resentment, division.
And then they use that division to justify taking advantage of certain groups, getting rid of social safety nets.
Exactly. Stanley talks about Hitler attacking unions, welfare systems. He called them tools of Jewish Marxism, meant to destroy economies.
Another scapegoat, right? Find an enemy, blame them for everything, and then take away their rights.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Stanley connects this to, what we see happening today with attacks on welfare programs.
So they use similar language, right?
Yeah.
To make people who need these programs look, lazy or dependent. And then they use that to justify cutting funding.
Cutting services for the people who need them most.
It's all about creating this us versus them mentality.
Exactly. The deserving versus the undeserving. And that kind of thinking, it breaks down the things that bring people together, that support fairness.
It's like they're saying, if you don't fit our idea of a good citizen, then tough luck. You're on your own.
A dangerous, dehumanizing message. It creates a society where people are against each other, where kindness is seen as weakness.
So we've looked at all these mechanisms of fascism, the mythic past, law and order, Arbeit macht frei. It's been pretty dark.
It has.
But also really insightful.
And we've seen how these mechanisms, they're all connected.
They work together.
They build on each other to create this really dangerous way of looking at the world.
One that thrives on division and fear. But before we move on, I think it's important to say that, understanding this stuff, it's not about being paranoid.
No, not at all.
It's about being informed.
Being aware of these tactics.
Knowing how they try to manipulate us.
It's about recognizing that these dangers, they're not just in the past, they're still here.
And understanding how fascism works is the first step to stopping it.
Exactly.
From taking root and destroying our freedoms.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? We've spent all this time talking about these really, really dark mechanisms of fascism. It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
It is.
It's even hopeless, But Stanley doesn't, leave us in the dark.
No, he doesn't.
He says we can fight back.
We can. He reminds us that these fascist tactics, they need secrecy to work. They rely on tricking you, on being subtle.
Yeah, they sneak into our lives.
Through language, through twisting our values, through our fears.
Which is why, it's so important to be aware.
Awareness is key.
We got to, really pay attention to the words people use, the stories they tell us.
And question those stories.
Question them, yeah.
Don't just accept them.
And he really pushes for critical thinking.
Yes.
Media literacy.
Super important these days.
Oh, totally. I mean, we're drowning in information.
We are.
Coming from everywhere. It's hard to, figure out what's real and what's not.
It is. It's like, we're swimming in this sea of information and we got to learn how to, stay afloat.
Yeah, without getting swept away by all the fake stuff.
Right. We have to, check our sources, look for bias and really think for ourselves.
And it's not always easy, especially when people are trying to manipulate us with all this emotional stuff.
No, it's not.
So Stanley leaves us with some tough questions.
He does.
How can we, as individuals, as a society, resist all this? How do we protect ourselves from this pull towards fascism? Big questions.
Yeah. How do we build a culture where people think critically?
Right.
How do we support institutions that promote truth, knowledge?
How do we, build bridges, connect with people across all these divides that are being exploited?
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest question. How do we not forget the lessons of history? How do we, learn from the past so we don't keep making the same mistakes over and over again?
It's on all of us. And it starts with these conversations.
Right.
With educating ourselves.
Yeah.
And others about the dangers.
Yeah.
About the tactics.
About how this stuff is still happening today.
Exactly.
Not just in the history books.
Why this conversation is so important. We can't just, sit back and do nothing.
Right.
We got to be active.
You've got to protect these values. Freedom, equality, justice. That's what makes a real democracy.
It's a constant fight.
It is.
But we're not powerless. We understand how it works.
We can stop it.
We can work together to make sure it doesn't win. Well said. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This has been, a tough conversation.
It has.
But a really important one.
Definitely. We need to be having these conversations more than ever.
Absolutely. Remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
And by understanding how this dark stuff works, we can all be part of the solution. So everyone listening, stay informed, stay involved, and keep thinking critically.
Don't let them fool you.
Exactly. Thanks for listening, everybody.